I've been very blessed in my life. I've been an entrepreneur for 34 years. I've been a professor for 25, now going into my 26th year. And I think I was one of the earlier people thinking about how do you teach entrepreneurship at a university level. So I got involved with helping to build entrepreneurship programs at all the major universities in the US. Has anyone ever heard of UNC Chapel Hill? UNC? So a few people have. We're known as the Tar Heels. The Tar Heels are a famous basketball team, one of the best in the world. In fact, Michael Jordan is one of our people. When I go in, and this is a class on global business, global commerce, and I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship and how it frames in the global side. But when I'm in a taxi cab anywhere in the world, I'll say where I'm from, and I'm from the United States. People are like, okay. I'm from North Carolina. Where's that? South of Washington. If you know, there was a major hurricane that just came through, and it actually affected our state more than anywhere else. It was the most devastating hurricane in the United States. Then I say, I'm from Chapel Hill. They're like, no idea. But my school is where Michael Jordan went. They're like, oh yeah, I know Michael Jordan. Yeah, Michael Jordan, I get it. So it's funny how, and I want to take you all through this process of perception and how it can become an advantage in building high-performing entrepreneurial economies or communities. And I want to challenge you all. Can we make Guatemala the greatest entrepreneurial hotspot in Latin or Central America? Do you think that we can make Guatemala the highest performing entrepreneurial economy in this region? I'm seeing some nods. Are you enthusiastic about that possibility? I guarantee you can do it if you want to do it. And I'm very bullish on what could happen because of the leadership in this room and because of this institution and how it's designed. University Francisco Marroquín is positioned like no other institution in the world to do the work of building great entrepreneurs who are going to lead the future of the economy of Guatemala and as a leader in Latin America. So I'm excited to be part of this. I've had an experience, and I'm not going to do a PowerPoint. Unlike other classes, I want you all to be on your computer right now, believe it or not. Now, you can go on Instagram if you want, or whatever you do. I don't care. But I would like you to use the computer as an extension of your global travel. So we're going to travel around the globe, and I'm going to tell you a story of what I've unpacked. And you're going to be searching. And I've actually asked one of your colleagues to come and teach. I'm so sorry, Sophie, I put you through this. But I asked some of the students in the front row who was really good at doing research and kind of working globe. And Sophie was willing to kind of be my victim. So thank you, Sophie. Come on up. Let's give it a round. So Sophie is going to help us curate what you're doing on your computers. And I'm going to talk you through a story, and we'll turn the screens on when it's ready. So we have to kind of make this up. All right, first off, I want to talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I was really surprised as a young entrepreneur. I was a tech entrepreneur, and I knew a lot about software back in the dark ages, right? I was in the first revolution that turned big systems on the internet. And I was surprised. I was working with these other entrepreneurs and how lonely it was as an entrepreneur. And it was very difficult to start a company. And feel free to go into Chrome. So everyone should go to a search engine, whatever search engine you use. And we're going to use the computer to actually display maybe the way you might be using your computer. And I was surprised that while entrepreneurship is a lonely type of process, that you can build networks with other entrepreneurs. And I got obsessed after doing several companies and then financing several companies. I've been an angel investor all my life as well. That, it's interesting. Every region has a different advantage and disadvantage. And I've worked all over the world building entrepreneurial hotspots that are now seen as leaders in the global economy. And I want to tell you the story, and then I want to do it for Guatemala with you. So we're going to go around the world. So it started in my home region. My home region is called Research Triangle Park. Could you, Sophie, Google Research Triangle Park? Or Research Triangle. And bring up an image or two. So Research Triangle, this is a great image right here. Could you double click on this one? Research Triangle is a region of the country. It's located here in North Carolina, but there's actually 3 universities associated with it. If you open up this one here, it's funny how, and this is the kind of thing you should be Googling Research Triangle. Research Triangle is in the top 10 hotspots in the United States. Let's just ask you all a question. When I talk about a hotspot, what am I talking about? What's a hotspot? Yeah, a lot of something there. And what I'm talking about is in the entrepreneurial context. So we're talking about where entrepreneurship thrives, right? So, everyone knows where the biggest hotspots are, right? Where are the biggest hotspots in the world for entrepreneurship? Austin, Texas. It's actually a comer. It's much like my region. In fact, Austin and Research Triangle Park they're like sisters in the United States. Where else? There's some obvious ones, right? Silicon Valley, thank you for that. The second biggest in the United States is Boston. And you might be surprised at cities like New York, Chicago, LA, very relevant. But you might be surprised at small cities like Boulder, Colorado, Research Triangle, Salt Lake City, San Diego in the United States are very high-performing entrepreneurial communities. And I got really interested in this idea of a high-performing entrepreneurial community and an entrepreneurial culture. And I started getting involved with this idea. So Research Triangle, back in the 50s, my state of North Carolina was very much like Guatemala. It was in the textile industry, it made furniture, and it grew tobacco. It was agricultural. And the governor of North Carolina decided that it would actually leverage 3 assets that were in the region. My home university, UNC Chapel Hill, which is the oldest public university in the United States, NC State University, which is an engineering university, and Duke University. And they're all within about 10 miles of one another. And then they plopped in what is a research park in the middle, and they started recruiting research-oriented organizations. And over 50 years, it became the largest concentration of research and development in the United States. It's the 3rd highest density of PhDs per capita. Now, let me ask you, and this is what's going to be fascinating to you, do you think that a high propensity or high percentage of PhDs, researchers, leads to a high percentage of entrepreneurs? What do you think? Some of you are skeptical. If you actually go and look at the research now, they're going to say, where there's a lot of brain power, you see a lot of entrepreneurism, right? Well, as a matter of fact, Research Triangle is one of the best networks for research, but it was actually underperforming in entrepreneurship, and I got really interested in this. So if you want to Google Entrepreneurial Network, I have a theory, and this is the concept of ecosystems. Can someone tell me what an ecosystem is? It comes from biology, right? What's an ecosystem? I'm going to cold call. Yeah, symbiosis, right? The environmental conditions, animals relate to one another, some eat one another, things grow, right? An ecosystem. How is it applied in an economic format? How is the term ecosystem tied to entrepreneurship? What is an entrepreneurial ecosystem? I'm not terribly satisfied with that word, to be honest with you. But when you think about it, what do you visualize in your mind? And feel free to Google it. Yeah, so it's a community of entrepreneurs, right? Well, I found out in my research, and you might look at some of these things like Daniel Eisenberg has a theory. If you could just Google entrepreneurship ecosystem, Daniel Eisenberg. Just add Daniel Eisenberg. So Daniel Eisenberg at Babson College has a theory of entrepreneurial ecosystems, and it talks about the things that relate to the ecosystem, the things that affect the performance of an ecosystem. Why isn't, when we say, where are the biggest hotspots? Eisenberg's model is right here if you click on this. By the way, this is the future of learning because you all should be on your computer. You should be using AI. You should be leveraging outside resources. This isn't about me telling you anything. I'm not performing for you. I'm helping you learn, right? And we're literally going to go around the world in this classroom. So Eisenberg's concept of an entrepreneurial ecosystem involves 6 factors. So you can probably read it, but what do you think the factors that influence the performance of an entrepreneurial network or economy are? In a given region, what things influence whether or not firms are created and firms perform and firms do well and firms grow? What are the things that you would expect? Yeah, low barriers to entry. It's an easy place to start a business. You can register a company quickly. There's not a lot of traction against you, right? Good answer. What else? Human capital. You've got the right people that can do the right things for the given business that you have, right? What else? Yeah, and fair play, right? Open private markets with a good government and a good legal system, right? Well, these are some of the factors. Eisenberg actually went through it. Policy, he would call government policy, markets, human capital, different supports, ESOs, entrepreneur support organizations, culture, and finance. This is a key driver, culture. Every community is different. And you're going to find, first off, I got to bring up 2 things from your theory. You're all steeped in economic theory. One of the fathers of entrepreneurship is Schumpeter. What does Schumpeter say? What is he known for? What economic theory? Schumpeter. Anyone know? It relates to ecosystems, believe it or not. Think about it as kind of large things consuming small things, or destruction. Anybody? Schumpeter's, Schumpeter. Schumpeter. You want to put it up there? Yes. It's about creating scalable, reputable events, but he's known for a key thing. That's right. It's about competitiveness. It's about how different organizations find advantages over other organizations. But he's known for one key concept: creative destruction. Have you ever heard of that? What is creative destruction? You know why this institution values entrepreneurship so much? Entrepreneurs destroy things, but not destroy things with the purpose of eliminating things, but to make them better. They are updating the economy always. So every economy needs a class of entrepreneurs that are competing and forcing the incumbents in the market that are already sitting there and executing to do better. They're always updating the market. Please. It's led by innovation, and Schumpeter talks about how entrepreneurs as a class drive innovation into the economy. So it's not just about serving people's needs, it's about doing better. They're always competing. There was another key exponent in the 90s, a Harvard professor named Michael Porter. And you've all studied Michael Porter, right? What did Michael Porter introduce by way of competition as a concept? Anybody want to volunteer? The notion of competitive advantage. If you want to type in Michael Porter, competitive advantage. All right, so why am I bringing these things up? When you're talking about an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, they're looking for an environment, an ecosystem that has characteristics that allow them to scale their businesses, allow them to get into business. It has a characteristic of fair play, and there's human capital that help them drive, right? You're starting to see a high-performing ecosystem. And I was really curious in my little community of research triangle how an ecosystem worked. And I came up with a theory, and it may or may not be true, but I wanted to show you. I've been involved in the research triangle entrepreneurial community for all of my career. And I used some data to identify all of the entrepreneurs. And I found a novel way to find out how they were connected to one another through their common investment activities. And guess what? The network kind of looked like this. If you want to put up Ted Zoller, Dealmaker, my name, Dealmaker. The idea is that an entrepreneurial network might be comprised of lots and lots of people. And they're all connected to one another in some way. What I found was that a high-performing entrepreneurial ecosystem is very well connected, but what drove a high-performing entrepreneurial ecosystem were the serial entrepreneurs. What's a serial entrepreneur? You mentioned it in the context of Schumpeter. A serial entrepreneur. Yes, continuously. I would submit to you, how many of you would like to start a company in your life at some point? How many of you would like to start a company? Now, I will tell you, founders are rare people. But once you adopt entrepreneurship as a way of working in the economy, you're going to have many ventures. And the people who have started more than one venture, their second, their third venture, they're the ones who drive the performance of the economy. So communities that don't have, and I'm sorry, the deal makers would be a scholarship, but that's okay. You guys can look at the papers later. But the idea was there were certain nodes in entrepreneurs that were serial entrepreneurs, people who did multiple businesses. And what I found was that in a given ecosystem, there were certain people that were critical bridges for the creation of that network. So that extended network of people who are getting into entrepreneurship go through these same nodes again and again and again. So this idea of a high-performing ecosystem was based on serial entrepreneurs. So how do you find these people? How do you find people who've started several businesses? You just look for them, right? So what we did, I worked with the Blackstone organization. You guys know Blackstone's private equity group? Blackstone is a big private equity organization in New York. They gave me the opportunity to identify all the serial entrepreneurs in Research Triangle. We gave them a job. Their job was to help the next generation entrepreneurs. After they've had success and they made some money, their job is to open up their social capital so that you, as a startup entrepreneur, could get started, right? Okay. Well, I started using this concept, and it worked. I'm telling you, I've been involved in Research Triangle for 26 years. I pulled secondary data, was able to pull up my Rolodex without it being associated with me. I just looked for serial entrepreneurs based on their connections and how they were connected with one another. Well, I was really interested in this as a means to help regions that are not successful in building entrepreneurs. And I happened to have a friend who was working in Vienna, Austria. And Vienna is a beautiful place. Could you Google Vienna, Austria? So what are your perceptions? I want you all to Google Austria. How many of you have been to Austria? Okay, tell us about Austria. It's a really cool place. Tell us more. What? Great architecture. Some of those magnificent buildings. Why? The Habsburg Empire, right? It was the root of the Habsburg Empire. So they built these beautiful architectural, buildings, right? Architectural districts, really. Who else has been to Austria? What are some of your perceptions? Yeah. It's alpine. The mountains are obviously the Alps. It's very directed people. These are people who are very resilient people, but they're also very directed people. They come there, as you know, in World War II, Germany in the Anschluss actually took possession of Austria as part of Germany. So there's an obvious connection as Germanic people between Austria and Germany. But Austria is different than Germany, even though they're neighbors. Just like your neighboring country, Guatemalans are different than your neighbors, right? Austrians are different than Germans. How are Austrians different than Germans for those of you who've traveled there? How many of you would like to go to Austria? Yeah, Austria is a great place. Check it out. But it was not a good entrepreneurial place. It was very rule-bound. That if you were unsuccessful, you were never given a second chance. Culture played a key role. So I wanted to kind of lay out the advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages of an Austria was that they were very driven and they were very efficient. Capital and operationally efficient. but it made them better managers than it made them entrepreneurs. I started an intervention. I worked with an organization called INITS. It was an accelerator. What's an accelerator? Does anyone know what an accelerator is? So Google that. Entrepreneurial Accelerator. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of Austria before you leave. This is the Schönbrunn Palace, the cathedral. This is a very well-known. Dan Reed, who's a very famous computer scientist, just was on Facebook with me in front of the Vienna Cathedral. It's kind of, a very academic place, very scholarly place. It's very serious. It's not filled with humor. When I walked in this room, I saw everyone joking around. Everyone was smiling. You go to an Austrian classroom, everyone's like very buttoned up, and working on my thing. Why am I talking about this stuff? It's about culture, right? If everyone is really disciplined and careful and straight-laced, it creates a culture, right? It doesn't allow for trust to occur very easily. And it also, you have to prove yourself, continuously prove yourself. So if you go to Austria, now Google Austrian people, just to get an idea of how Austrian people present themselves. And I want you to be thinking the perceptions that you would have as someone who's grown up in Guatemala or the countries that you come from, how your perceptions, what were your perceptions before you walked into, this is classic, right? I mean, all these people with lederhosen and funny wigs, and you think of Mozart. Why is Mozart associated with Vienna? Well, the patron of Mozart was the emperor of the Habsburg emperor in Austria, so associated with classical music, blah blah blah, right? Okay, so I'm looking for advantages that I want to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and we started working. The other thing is economic theory. There are a lot of economists. This is Freud. This is Hitler. Hitler is an Austrian. It's sad. So is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Famous Austrians. These are all funny perceptions, right? Well, they wanted to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we created a thing. If you go to INITS, I-N-T-S. Yeah, put it right here, actually. The top, INITS.at. We created an ecosystem for entrepreneurs in Austria called INITS. It's not coming up yet. There you go. And INITS was a nationwide accelerator for entrepreneurship. We started in Vienna. Then we went to Innsbruck, then we went to Graz, then we went to Salzburg. And we started developing communities of entrepreneurs throughout Austria. And sure enough, that story throughout Austria became very vibrant. Using this basic thing, what we'd go to every city, we'd identify the serial entrepreneurs, we'd bring them together, and they would help the next generation entrepreneurs get started, as opposed to doing what they would be doing. INITS is now recognized in Europe as the #1 acceleration organization. Austria is a major hotspot now for entrepreneurism. 10 years ago, Munich, Germany would have been seen as the major entrepreneurial hotspot of the region. Now Vienna is, because of this intervention. Now, what were the advantages, based on your perception of Austria, what were some of the advantages we plugged in, and what were some of the disadvantages of building an entrepreneurial economy in Austria? What are your perceptions? What did we build on? Any ideas? Please, yes. Yeah, they're not open-minded. They're not open-minded, but they're very disciplined. They're very hardworking people, right? So we push that. What else would we have probably done? Highly educated, and I would argue scientific. So those were advantages. They were very driven, very efficient. They were very scientific and minded, and they were, while they were closed-minded, they were very discerning. I would say discerning is a better word. They are careful before they make decisions. They're not very experimental. Well, over 5 years working in Austria, there was a burgeoning number of new ventures that were not only going to startup, but going to growth. And Vienna became a major hotspot in Europe. Well, the Danish people heard about what I was doing in Austria, and they said, come to Denmark. How many of you have been to Denmark? Just one person? Anybody else? So would you mind sharing, what's Denmark like? It's very organized, very high design, right? Very creative, absolutely. Now, it's interesting, you have to get into the culture to really understand what drives entrepreneurism. So in Copenhagen, I want you to Google Copenhagen, and Copenhagen people, again, very highly educated. And Denmark is a small country. Anybody hazard a guess how many people live in Denmark? You can Google it, right? Isn't it 10 million? Somewhere around there? About the same size as my home state is North Carolina. I worked with Denmark for 10 years, developing their entrepreneurial economy. And like Austria, we opened up offices in Aarhus, which is their second largest city, and then their third and fourth largest city. And we built a countrywide network of acceleration programs. And in this particular case, and beautiful high design. Some of the cultural aspects of that were advantages for Denmark was design, and they were very open-minded. But there was one big disadvantage. There's a concept in Lutheran religion, believe it or not. This was a Protestant country. It has a state religion. While not many people go to church there, there's a cultural component called Yentelaw. Yentelaw. And I'll have to help with that one. Can you spell Jente? N-T-E law. 2 words. Law of Yenta, that's it. So bring that up for those of you, just read it. What is Yentelaw? What does Yentelaw say? The concept is like a floor like this. In Denmark, they're very egalitarian. Everyone blends in. They all work with one another, but no one stands out. The idea is if there's a nail on this floor, you pound it down. Everyone is the same. Who are our founders in here? Anyone founded a company in this room? Any founders? Current founders? Who are entrepreneurial? Do you guys stand out? Do you blend in nicely? No, you're in Schumpeter land. You're a creative destroyer, right? You're making messes all over the place. Well, Copenhagen and Denmark, Yentelaw, was really about compliance. It was one of their downsides. And compliance worked against entrepreneurship. In fact, the older generation in Denmark didn't like entrepreneurs because they stood out. The culture worked against entrepreneurism. Well, by using the dealmaker theory, we identified in Copenhagen and then in Aarhus and then in other cities in Copenhagen, the major serial entrepreneurs, and we started celebrating them and helping them get started. And the group that we worked with, and this is an organization called Accelerace, ACCELERACE.dk. Accelerace is now one of the foremost acceleration programs for all of Denmark. Now I'm curious, before you walked into this class, what were your perceptions of Denmark? Did anyone have any perceptions of Denmark? No one here has been to Denmark, right? When you saw the pictures, you saw a high design. I will submit to you, Denmark is 10 years ahead of all of us. What are they really known for? Environmental sustainability. I want to encourage you now to go to Denmark. You know why I want you to go to Denmark? If you're in Copenhagen, you're going to see that the entire city is powered by an incinerator. They take your trash and they burn it. Okay, that doesn't sound very environmental. Well, the scrubber they've put together doesn't release any CO2, and you can go ski on their accelerator. All the waste energy that comes out of the incinerator is a ski slope. So you can ski on their accelerator. At the base of the ski slope, next to their accelerator, is this really cool skate park where you can go and have a drink and hang out with people. It's called Refn, R-E-F-F-E-N. Very cool cultural thing where they adopted it. You know, what's the number one company in the wind power industry is Vestas, which is a Danish company. So they have a lot of advantages in design, but we had to work against compliance. We did the ecosystem, and now Copenhagen is seen as one of the hotspots. Before our work, Berlin was seen as a hotspot. Now Copenhagen is a major hotspot for entrepreneurism. Well, then I decided, I was invited around the same time I was working in Copenhagen by Iceland. How many of you have been to Iceland? It's like going to the moon. It's literally a 400,000 person sovereign nation in the middle of the North Atlantic. So think about that. How do you take care of Iceland? So you see the pictures here, some of the most beautiful spaces, but it's extraordinarily harsh. Their major city is Reykjavik, and it's only 200,000 people. They've optimized tourism as their primary resource, but they're known for making aluminum because of the energy use, and they're energy surplus country. They produce more energy than they need. It's all geothermal. By the way, that's a characteristic that is shared here in Guatemala. You have access to geothermal. For those of you who want to make $1 billion, get into the geothermal industry right now in Guatemala because you'll be a net energy exporter. Well, Iceland was a different scenario. If you could Google Icelandic financial crisis. In 2008-9, there was a major financial crisis. You were 5, 6 years old. Probably didn't know it. But what happened was all the banks in Iceland over-leveraged themselves in CDOs. And as a result, they were highly exposed to when the CDO crisis occurred, the banks were zeroed out. Literally, people lost millions, billions of dollars. The Icelandic people actually protested in the streets, and they put bankers in jail because of what happened. Well, now type in Iceland entrepreneurship. The president of Iceland, a man named Grimson, and one of the key entrepreneurs, Bala, I can't pronounce his last name, is an Indian guy, started Startup Iceland. And they wanted to use entrepreneurism as a vehicle to get the economy back going. Remember, Iceland is 400,000 people. Well, they have certain advantages. First off, they're very, very pragmatic, very practical, and they're resilient, they're tough, because they have to live in the middle of this frozen island. They had only one big disadvantage, and that was scale. They were very small. But they also had a major advantage with energy. Well, if you could Google Startup Iceland, this is the conference here. And this is actually a graphic from a presentation I made there. We started working for 5 years in Iceland. This was a 10-year project in Denmark, and a 5-year project in Iceland. And we actually extended it to another 5 years. But Iceland, again, is a frozen island in the middle of 400,000 people. They've had 10 unicorns. What's a unicorn? A company that starts and goes to $1 billion with private capital. Can you imagine a country of 400,000 people that have had 10 companies that have achieved billion-dollar market caps? And it's all because the community came together and developed a great entrepreneurial ecosystem. And now I would argue that entrepreneurism in Iceland has made Iceland a major hotspot. So Iceland is now a hotspot. All right, before I go on to the next one, Well, I'm going to just mention, if you could Google now Luxembourg, you probably have never been to Luxembourg, and if you had, what are your perceptions of Luxembourg? What's Luxembourg? It's even smaller than Iceland, tiny little country. What are your perceptions? Travel to Luxembourg right now. Everyone Google Luxembourg. Tell me about Luxembourg, please. Yeah, it's super rich country, usually one or two, first rich or second most wealthy country in the world. But does that make it entrepreneurial? Why is it rich? Why is Luxembourg rich? That's right. The EU's, it's one of EU's capitals. It's where the EU legislature meets, one of the three capitals. It's also the source of the investment bank. Banking. Luxembourg is known for banking, whereas Switzerland is known for private banking. The European public banks are primarily based in Luxembourg, right? Were you going to add something? Exactly. Well, because it's such a wealthy country, it has low income taxes, low barriers. But it was not an entrepreneurial place. There was one big advantage, had a lot of disadvantages. The banking community actually was very financialized. That's a disadvantage. So because the community, the network was all bankers, it was much more financialized. And as a result, they didn't honor people who were building companies. But they had one big advantage. What's the population distribution of Luxembourg? How many people come from Luxembourg and live in the country? It's a highly global place. 80% of everyone who lives in Luxembourg comes from somewhere else, and not just adjacent countries, Africa, the US, Asia. It's where business is done everywhere. Major advantage. We've just started a 5-year project now in Luxembourg, and this is a tiny little country, and we're working with the university there, the University of Luxembourg, and they have a great program. And now we've integrated it with MIT, and we're building out an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I tend to think that Luxembourg is going to become a major hotspot. So this is Ted Zoller's life over the last 30 years. I spent 5 years working in Vienna, 10 years working in Denmark, another 10 years working in Iceland, overlapping with Copenhagen. I've spent 5 years in Luxembourg. Now I want to work with Guatemala. What are some of the, and will you Google Guatemala entrepreneurship? Okay, I want to just pick on myself for a moment. I'm an American. I'm a gringo, right? Tell me, what are your perceptions of American entrepreneurship? What are the characteristics of American entrepreneurs? Why is the US associated with entrepreneurism? Please. Yeah, a lot of innovation, a lot of technology. Yeah. What else? Get into the culture of the place. Yeah, it's somewhat creative. Not the most creative place, but it's creative. It certainly recognizes good creativity. Very practical. A lot like Iceland in that respect. It's pretty organized. You know, it's kind of a hot mess, to be honest with you. It's this huge place, but it has lots of regions that have different characteristics. Well, it shares a major commitment that Guatemala, oh, please. That's right. At the turn of the century, an immigration movement inspired the development of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Very focused on the capital markets, free markets, very focused on the rule of law. So if you go back to Eisenberg's ecosystem model, we check a lot of those boxes. But I'll tell you the key driver of American entrepreneurism is the fact that we were pioneers. We went from the East Coast to the West Coast, and that created a whole series of people who had what I call gumption. That's probably a word you've never heard of, but you're going to hear a lot about it. I'm writing a book called Gumption, which is about the person who takes it upon themselves. How many of you feel like you need to, okay, I'm going to just work an experiment here before we talk about Guatemala. And how am I doing on time? How much more time do I have? 25 minutes, great. All right, I'm going to do a little experiment. How many of you believe sometime in your life either you'll work for or start an entrepreneurial venture? Okay, I'd say about 80% of you, right? Of you, how many are really interested in starting a business? Okay. All right, now let's put yourself, you're all students now. You're sitting here with me. There are 7 reasons why you have to convince yourself that you can go be an entrepreneur. How many of you feel like, that want to start a company, how many of you feel like you've got a good idea? 1 or 2, that's the first level. That's just table stakes. There's millions of ideas. By the way, in your life as an entrepreneur, you're going to be encountering thousands of ideas, and you'll probably be able to address about 10 of them in your lifetime in different ways. The second level is, do you have the resources? Do you have the money or do you have the time? Time and money are correlated. How many of you feel like you have the money and the time to start a business right now? Yeah, okay. All right, the third reason why is you don't have the skills. Why are you here? You're trying to learn skills to become an entrepreneur, right? That's the third level. The big one on preparation is, how many of you have had entrepreneurial experiences? Have you had experience? Some of you have interned, some of you have had experiences, but a lot of you haven't had those experiences. The next level is, are you prepared to take risk? Now, this is a cultural question. When I talk about the Guatemala culture, is it a culture that takes risks? Are you prepared to take risk? How do you think about risk? Please. And you put yourself out there, don't you? Risk is something that you must assume if you're going to be an entrepreneur. And you have to prepare. How many of you are afraid of risk? Let's be honest with each other. How many of you are afraid of risk? I'll tell you, I will celebrate you because I want you on my team, because you guys are going to come up with the 20 reasons why I will fail. And I'm going to solve for every one of those. And the people who know risk know how to mitigate risk and become great entrepreneurs, as a matter of fact. It's not correlated if you take risk, but the person who takes risk has to take risk at some point. You've got to convince yourself. What is the major reason why you don't become a founder today? I don't have the confidence to be an entrepreneur. That's the biggest one. It's giving yourself permission. Why am I going into this? Because all these cultural characteristics blend in different ways that lead people to make decisions about starting companies and creating ecosystems. Now, I want to solve it for Guatemala. All right, picking on America, when you think about American culture, what are some of the things you think about? And you can be insulting, by the way. Gun violence, cowboys, what else? Ignorance. Yeah, sometimes we can be really stupid. We're at the height of our stupidity right now. Burgers and fries. Had a good one in Guatemala last night, as a matter of fact. You can tell I never have missed a burger, right? But Americans are pretty generous people, and they generally give themselves permission. They don't look for anyone to give them permission. I get the same impression here in Guatemala. Okay, I had perceptions come into Guatemala. Are you interested in what I thought about Guatemala when I came here? Okay, let me tell you the positives. I thought Guatemala was creative. I thought there was a lot of indigenous population here that brought a lot of great culture, deep history, great tradition. I believe that people in Guatemala were very good people. I think they were very tight as a community. Am I getting it right so far? Okay. When I go to I want to just point out something. Go to Guatemala, U.S. State Department. U.S. State Department. This is how Americans view Guatemala right now. Go into the regular search. Travel advisory is the first thing that comes up in Google search. U.S. government personnel and family members. Okay, I'm bringing this up for a reason, by the way, because I think it's an unfair thing. We've got to break it down. It says, reconsider Guatemala due to crime. Some areas have increased risk. Read the entire travel advisory. Do not travel to 3 areas. And then violent crimes such as extortion, murder, armed robbery, carjacking, narcotics trafficking, and gang activity are common in Guatemala. If you have plans to go to Guatemala, reconsider them. Why aren't Americans coming to Guatemala? They go there. Now, I thought I was going to get kidnapped the moment I landed here. No, I didn't. Because I've been treated so well. And you people are beautiful people. And I want more Americans to engage with Guatemala. Now, one thing I was surprised by is when I talked about these Western countries, how many of you have been out of your own country? Almost all of you. How many of you have been to Europe? Okay. How many of you have been to Asia? Okay. You have 3 big advantages in your careers. Why am I asking you to go to Google? Why am I asking you to learn with me using AI, using search? Guess what? Your parents and your grandparents couldn't have even dreamed of doing that. That's advantage 1. You have information at your fingertips. Advantage 2, how would you characterize the world economy right now? Is the world economy global? We've got challenges, though. Let's be honest. What are our challenges right now? What? Oh, graduating is a challenge for everybody. Believe me, I remember when I did my PhD defense, I said to myself, I'll never take a test again in my life until I'm like 80 and have to do a driving test. The biggest challenge right now is war, right? War is an outdated concept. I'm not making a value judgment. Everyone would agree, right? War is an invalid concept. Yet it's now interrupting global flow. The second big advantage you have that your parents and grandparents didn't have is you're engaged in a global economy. You can compete all over the world. Now that's an advantage and a disadvantage. How is it a disadvantage? If you're not organized, you're exploited, right? Why do we need entrepreneurs? Because they create value. We want Guatemalans to be entrepreneurs. The third biggest advantage you have, if I were in this classroom when I was starting, and I was your age, and I asked the same question, how many of you have been out of your home country? 3 people would have raised their hands, and they would have gone to England. So you are connected with a global mindset. Third major advantage that you have in your lifetime that your parents and grandparents did not have. You leverage those to build an entrepreneurial mindset that's global in orientation, but local and community-driven in its base. So let's talk about Guatemala. And I'm sorry about bringing this terrible information up. Doesn't this piss you off? Doesn't this make you mad? It's not fair, is it? Tell me about Guatemala. How would you like Guatemala to be characterized to other people in the world? What is Guatemala? What are the advantages of Guatemala culture? Tell me more. Hardworking. I picked that up. Major advantage. Okay, what else? Deep cultural heritage and connection. Okay, what else? Unbelievable. I mean, what a gorgeous country. Just a natural ecosystem. What else? Are your family ties really connected? You'd be surprised. Just going back, you're a lot like Denmark. One of the advantages of Denmark is that everyone in Denmark knows one another. Same with Iceland, by the way. I have the feeling that Guatemala is a lot the same. Now, the good news is you know everyone, so you can connect with the right people. The bad news is if you screw up, then everyone knows about it, right? Can you fail in Guatemala? And is failure celebrated, or do you get marked for death? That's a big question. So we're looking for, and let's get off this is really a downer. Let's Google Guatemala entrepreneurship. Dean Zelaya and a team here at UFM has been engaged in a longitudinal project called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. I want you guys to Google the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Have you ever heard of it? It's a longitudinal cultural study of entrepreneurship framing conditions for each country in the world, and Guatemala has participated, thanks to Dean Zelaya, for the last decade. And she's leveraging that data to help think about how do we connect to the indigenous communities in the poorer areas of Guatemala and UFM. You all are the Harvard students of Guatemala. So you all represent the next generation of the entrepreneurial leaders of Guatemala. Are you ambitious for this country? Would you like this country to be a hotspot? Like Iceland, like Copenhagen, like Vienna, like Luxembourg? Do you want that? What are the advantages you're going to take advantage of? Hardworking, a deep cultural heritage, an affinity with nature. Think about other advantages. I'm sorry? Yeah, the position right in the center of between North and South America, right? So the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor compares the framing conditions culturally of every country in the world that participates in the monitor. And I would suggest that in this course, you actually study the results. And in that, if you unpack the results, let's click on, let's see, activity review. I think there's probably a report for Guatemala. Here we go. So 2023 report. You can download that if you want at your leisure. But it talks about the advantages and the challenges of building an entrepreneurial ecosystem in Guatemala. I'm really hungry to see Guatemala as the next major hotspot. And I see all the characteristics that I've seen in these other hotspots, and all of them had challenges. And all of them had scale problems that you actually can overcome because you're a bigger country. I would really like to have a conversation with you now on how you can actually build on our knowledge. Can you download it? Is it possible? Oh, it takes 29 seconds. Okay. I saw hands. So let's start a conversation. How do we make Guatemala the next entrepreneurial hotspot of Latin America?
I just have a question. How do you go from first world Western European countries that they have a lot of things in common between to a third world country like Guatemala? Like, I don't know, at first glance maybe I'm a little skeptical, but it seems like a bunch of comparing how something that would work in a first world country will work here.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern, and I'm sure in the Global Entrepreneurship Model they talked about the developing economy and the challenges of the developing economy, corruption, things of that, rule of law. But there are hotspots, believe it or not, in Latin America. Where are the hotspots, entrepreneurial hotspots that are emerging in just Central America? Where have you heard there are hot cities where entrepreneurship's thriving in Central America? What? Costa Rica? And Colombia is not considered Central America, right, as Latin America, but there's a city in Colombia that everyone is talking about. Do you know what city it is? Medellin. Medellin. What is Medellin known for? It's the capital of the drug industry, right? And they're now an entrepreneurial hotspot. So if you can turn Medellin into an entrepreneurial hotspot, you can turn any place into an entrepreneurial hotspot. You know what it takes? It takes you. It takes you saying, I want to build a great company in a great country, and that you work with everyone in your class to do the same thing. Now, some of you are going to go and work for incumbents, but I know I'm getting through to a few of you that are going to go out and become serial entrepreneurs who are going to really transform this country through entrepreneurism, and I'm really excited about that potential. Now, there are a lot of reasons that will be working against you, right? What are the barriers you're going to face as an entrepreneur here in Guatemala? What's that? Corruption's a key problem, right? I saw a statistic that almost every government decision, 80%, involves some type of bribe. I worked with a guy who was building an accelerator in Uzbekistan in the former Soviet Union, and he literally called me. He said he had a great design for his accelerator, and he said, the government's coming to visit me, and at the end of the meeting, I'll know if I'm starting or not. The government will tell him whether or not they will start. So there are places that are even worse than just corruption. It's just they're telling him whether or not he can go. What else? I saw some hands. Infrastructure. Yeah, it's interesting. You know where the biggest hotspot is now? Fastest growing entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world. Do you know where it is? India. Have you ever been to India? Yeah. Leapfrog right over the existing infrastructure. You need to. And could you do that? Could you start the next Wi-Fi 5G network? Could you help build the better electrical program, or get charging stations going to convert us to electrical? Sure. Yeah, you could do it. Yeah. Uh, I think everything you're going to bring up is overcomable. I mean, this is a frozen sovereign island that was broke, and they figured it out. Medellin, Colombia, figured it out. We're going to figure it out. And you've got one big advantage, UFM. And I just want to celebrate this institution, because I will tell you, you all are privileged in a way that you are not aware. There is no other institution that I have visited that's structured the way this institution is, where you can study all sorts of disciplines, but understand the effect of entrepreneurism as part of that process. And the fact that it's focused on building private leaders who can actually develop the next generation of the economy of this country. So I'm very privileged to be here, y'all. And I hope I've inspired you a little bit. I hope I've given you something to think about. I hope I've given you, a framework to think about how you will build this economy and how you will play a role personally in that process. So was that helpful? I'm going to hang around if you guys want to ask questions. By the way, my content, and I want to thank you so much, Sophie. You were fantastic. I appreciate it. And by the way, that came up. Nice work. My email is zoller@unc.edu, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. Ted Zoller is my first name. So if you know LinkedIn, all of you should have a LinkedIn profile. By the way, if you, I develop entrepreneurs as well. I have a program that does that, and we build a portfolio. You should think about all of your socials, every way that you are identifying who you are and your superpower. Really break it down and start to build a portfolio of who you are and why you add value. You don't all have to be founders. In fact, you'd be surprised that many of the C-level people have no founder gene, but they're great in other ways. So everyone in this room can play a role in building the economy that I'm talking about. I'm really bullish about your future. So please feel free to leverage me, and thank you, UFM, for letting me be part of this.